Let's go. Come on in, let's go to where the pictures show, where the hero wins and the monster grins, and everybody knows that face up in those bright projector lights. Well, you might recognize someone here tonight, some thespian also starring in a movie that you like. The face up in those bright projector lights.
Hello and welcome to Also Starring. We are your hosts, Dan and Morgan. This is a show where we talk about movies. And each episode, we will be talking about a movie based on an actor who also starred in the movie we talked about last time. So we're kind of leapfrogging our way from one movie to the next based on one actor that they have in common. But for this episode, which also happens to be our first, we're just talking about a movie that we thought would be fun to talk about, which is not Alien or Aliens, but Alien 3. So get ready for some deep space, xenophobic, bald-headed existential terror, because the bitch is back. All right. So we're here today to talk about Alien 3. It was a movie that came out in 1992. And it was the third installment of the Alien franchise, started off by Ridley Scott in 1979, followed by James Cameron doing Aliens, and then David Fincher directed Alien 3, which was sort of considered at the time kind of like the dropping off point for the franchise, where it just kind of went downhill after that. I grew up watching this movie. My brother had rented it and then taped it onto VHS, and he had it in his room, and I would like sneak it out of his room on days when I stayed home from school, and basically just watched it all the time and loved it. I knew that it wasn't really well liked. Like, older people told me how they didn't like, the Hicks and Newt had been killed off, and they thought it was too dark and too depressing. But for whatever reason, it was my Alien movie. I remember the poster, seeing the poster in the movie theater and loving it with that alien embryo curled in a circle. I thought was so awesome, and the trailers were so exciting. I didn't get to see it in the theater, but it was the first one that came out when I was even aware of what those movies were.
Some of my first two notes are Hicks is dead, ? Newt is dead, ? Why did you kill those characters off? It's kind of funny that that's what you remember from the early times, too, that people were saying that, because when you go back and watch Aliens, you're thinking, okay, this is going to be like the next story. Like, what are these characters going to do together? And then to have it be so bleak and so transformatively different than the second one, yeah, I could see it catching people off guard a little bit, to the point where they get angry. Luckily, it was before the internet, so you didn't have too many people bashing it online or whatever. Still, I'm sure there was fan outrage. When do you remember first seeing the special edition?
The special edition came out in 2003 or something like that?
I think you're right, 2003.
And I remember seeing it and thinking, it was funny because I liked the original theatrical one, so I remember thinking the first time I saw it, oh, this is interesting, having all this stuff added back in, but it's longer, and I don't know that it makes it better. And the whole like subplot with Galek, breaking, like they capture the alien and then he breaks it out, I thought was kind of dumb when I first watched it. So I was like, well, I see why they cut this out. But I mean, last night I watched both versions back to back. I watched the theatrical and then I watched the special edition, and I thought the special edition is an improvement. I mean, it's a more mature kind of story, and you get more in depth with the characters. I mean, the theatrical moves at like a faster clip. It feels more like, all right, we're like getting into this kind of right off the bat. Then the special one kind of, it takes its time. But I think it's ultimately a better movie with all that stuff added back in.
So I did not get a chance to watch the original. I've only seen the special. You mentioned Gallic, but they've also changed a few other things like the ox instead of the dog, and then the slower pacing.
The ox is one of those things where I was like, I think I like the dog better. There's something about the dog, and this sounds kind of like sick, but the juxtaposition of the dog whimpering and Dylan saying the "Why are the innocent punished?" line, like they're cutting back and forth between that and the funeral. It's more powerful to me than like the dead ox, but the dead ox stuff still looks really cool. I mean, that whole butcher room, the walls are just covered in blood. It's pretty awesome looking too. So I could go either way.
I have some seriously deep thoughts on the ox versus the dog situation.
Yeah. Okay.
Two things come to mind right off the bat. So when the first guy dies, I can't remember what his name is. He falls into the fan. It's because
Murphy.
Oh, right.
Which, by the way, I want to say the biggest mistake of this movie is not casting Tom Waits to play Murphy, because that would have been perfect with him singing that fucking weird song and having the goggles on his head. It would have been...
Okay, was that a real song?
Well, I always grew up just thinking he was saying nonsense. If you watch it with the subtitles on it, like it has the lyrics and it's like, in the year 7049, blah, blah, blah. It's like, what the fuck? What the fuck is this?
Wait, what year is it supposed to be in this movie? It's like 150 years or 200 years in the future or something like that, right?
I have no idea. I didn't research that.
2170 or something like that. We'll have to come back to that. But okay, I gotta finish my point on the office.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So Murphy, which also I have a note here, Murphy's Law. So I thought, was that like the writers trying to be funny?
Maybe,
because that his death kind of kicks off the whole thing, right? But he's sitting there yelling into a hole in the special edition, and he's like, "Spike, is that you, Spike?" And it's like,
yeah.
Who's Spike? Because you don't ever get shown who Spike is in the special edition because they cut the dog out.
Oh, yeah.
So it doesn't actually make sense. And you're kind of like, wait a minute. And then when I found out that they did additional dialogue recording years later for that special edition, they didn't fix that. So why did they not change it to one of the other prisoners who you've met already to make it kind of make sense of like who Spike is? Okay.
I guess that's just a mistake. I mean... That's one of those things I think you just chalk up to like the whole production was like a mess.
Well, that's going to come back to my ultimate point of this movie, which is there's so many little mistakes that end up adding up. I think that's what people pick up on, is that there's all these little errors that end up summing to the to this grandiose problem that we have here with this movie. Well, I'm not trying to convince you to change your opinion on it, but at the end of this, I'm hoping to see what you think about my points.
Okay. Oh no, I'm interested. I'm kind of one of those people who like, I don't always see the plot holes and stuff. I'm much more forgiving. But I remember having an argument with my dad one time about like Terminator or something, and I was like trying to say how it doesn't make sense because of this, and this, and he was like, "It's a movie. Like the less you think about it, the more you're gonna enjoy it." So I think that was like advice that I took to heart.
Okay, but I mean. Yeah,
anyway,
your dad is right.
I digress. I digress.
You should know that movies are for entertainment, and you shouldn't be there analyzing the hell out of them. But for this particular discussion,
I mean, I'm interested to hear.
I analyzed
because I had never even thought about that thing with the him calling out to Spike not making any sense in the director's cut. But you're totally right.
The other thing is that Alien, when it comes out, is a big motherfucker. It's not a little chest burster. Yeah. And when it comes out of a dog, it doesn't make any sense. It will explode the entire dog. And so, but if it comes out of my notes, I call it the beef. If when it comes out the beef, how is it so big?
Beef. I think that makes sense because oxen are large. They're larger than humans.
So now, does that posit that this movie is saying that whatever gestation host the animal goes into, it takes on those attributes of that? Therefore...
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, that's why this alien looks... I mean, it moves and looks different. They talk about that in the behind-the-scenes stuff. It's on all fours more, and it's shaped a little bit differently. I mean, when it's the guy in the suit, it still looks like a guy in a suit. But when it's the puppet that they use, it moves differently than they've ever looked. I think that was intentional.
That puppet was amazing. I mean, watching those
Dude.
puppeteers do that was quite impressive. It was like,
Yeah, one of the things that really brings the movie down for me, I think, is the way the alien looks when it's the puppet in certain scenes, especially at the end. And it's a shame because, for the longest time I just thought like, oh, it's just early CGI, it just doesn't look good. And at the time I thought it looked great, but now it's aged poorly. But then when you watch the behind the scenes stuff, it's like, no, it's not even CGI. It's a puppet that they then overlaid into the scenes, and it's actually really amazing and really cool. And I love it. I think the shortcoming is that they couldn't reproduce the lighting of the sets properly. So it looks real, but it doesn't look like it's where it is. It looks like it's from somewhere else, It doesn't match the scenes, which sucks because like if they did something like that now, they'd probably put motion capture dots all over it and then it would look like flawless. But I don't think they'd go to the trouble of making a puppet these days. They'd just be like, man, fuck it, do it with a computer.
I almost kind of want to see somebody try to do that because of how cool the effect ends up being with the range of motions you get. I feel like it's like this organic motion that maybe an animator studying something and trying to replicate it in the computer. They get very close, but it's there's something about the way that the tail moves and the way that the arms move and everything that just makes it look very cool. But all those points you said, I 100% agree with. The behind the scenes did talk a little bit about they used laser disc technology in order to overlay instantaneously on top of the film. And so I was like, oh man, that must have been something that somebody worked very hard to come up with. And then like the next year, Jurassic Park came out and everyone was like, oh, we don't need this shit anymore.
Just threw it all in a vault
somewhere. You see that sometimes in other technologies where something gets pushed to the very edges and they have these weird things that they have to do in order to eke out more performance. And then some technological breakthrough will come and then it's like, oh man, all that stuff is gone now. You don't need it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost wish somebody would go back and like attempt that kind of combination
love to see
again.
A modern sci-fi movie after watching all the behind the scenes and watching this with matte paintings, updated with ships that are models and with puppetry in it, but like then take all of those elements and then bring them into the 21st century and use the motion capture and stuff and see what you could come up with, just because they give this feel that is like hard to explain, but it's like you have this feeling that's hard to replicate with clean looking CGI, that just everything is very much rendered the right way. Everything is right. I guess there's like a little bit of like brokenness to it or error to it that makes it look cool. Like the exterior shots in this movie are beautiful.
Yeah, I wish that we got a little bit more stuff outside. It would have been nice, but that's one thing the special edition has over the theatrical is like that whole opening with Clements walking outside by himself, where he discovers Ripley is not in the theatrical at all.
Yeah, and they talk about that in the behind the scenes of it giving some sense of the loneliness that these people have, where they're just kind of by themselves and they don't really have much going on.
That he is also sort of like set apart from them. He's not like one of them. He's kind of a loner also, which I have to say, like watching this again, it made me appreciate Charles Dance, who plays Clements. It made me appreciate his performance a whole lot more. He's fucking awesome. I mean, they one of the producers mentions in the behind the scenes stuff, he realized late in the game that they shouldn't have killed him off so early in the movie. Like it would have been nice to have him around longer, but that's one of the things that I discovered. We get more into this when we talk about the 3 acts structure, as like, I like the first act the best. And then the second act kind of drags for me. And then the third act picks back up again because you've got Charles S. Dutton as Dylan stepping into more of an active role. Then Ripley has him to play off of and they become, interesting to watch together.
Let's go back to Clarence Dance for a second, because I also thought, after talking to Surya, she watched the movie last night and said, what, he was great. And then he was just gone. And I said, that's how I feel about it too. But But he was also in Last Action Hero as the bad guy.
Yeah.
And that movie,
That's what I was hoping you were going to
is
bring
awesome
that up.
too. And so he
Yeah.
had kind of like a bad luck streak in the early 90s of being in these movies that he's great in, and then the movies just don't do well, or people don't like them for whatever reason. And then 20, 30 years later, people are talking about them and saying like, oh, but this was really cool and his performance was really great. I wonder if that hurt his career at all, because it just seems like he got unlucky.
I mean, it must have, but all these guys are probably like stage actors too, and they probably do a lot of stuff, in Europe, and I'm sure they still have careers. And I've heard the name Charles Dance a bit outside of this movie, but I can't think of anything else that I've seen him in other than Last Action Hero.
That was another problem I had with telling the inmates apart from each other. I feel like a lot of them looked very similar to each other.
Yeah.
So when you had a standout character that had a backstory and you got to know him a little bit, and then for him to be gone so quickly after you found that out, you're kind of like, well, I don't know any of these other guys, so how can I really care about what they do? They don't have anything interesting. We just found out this very interesting history from his character, and he is having this love interest all of a sudden with Ripley, and then all of a sudden he's gone.
And now his head is exploded. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a weird combination of elements where you've got like all these guys with British accents. I mean, not all of them, but a majority of them have accents, and they're not like known American actors. And then you shave all their heads and put them all in like similar clothes and have them run around in the dark in like this kind of monotone looking facility. And you don't really get back. You get very, very scant backstories on any of them. And then in the theatrical cut, they cut out even more stuff. Yeah, I mean, American audiences didn't even know who these guys were, couldn't really attach to them to like care about what would happen, which is, in my opinion, it's like the cornerstone of any effective scary movie is like you have to care about what's going to happen to the characters to some extent. Otherwise it's not really scary. It's just like, fun for the gore or something, which this movie doesn't really deliver on that either. I mean, it's got some gore, but it's nothing crazy really.
I agree.
I mean, except for the autopsy, which is like that scene is, even to this day, like it makes my hair stand up. Ugh, so grim.
Is there another autopsy scene in another one of Fincher's movies? I feel like he's done that a few times. Is there one in Zodiac or one in?
There's one in Seven.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not.
7.
They're not actively cutting him open, but it's
he's already splayed open. Is that right? What it is?
The gluttony guy is on the table, and he's like pulling out stuff from his. You don't see him like opened up. I think he's already sewn back shut, but he's got like his organs on the table and shit.
I agree. Autopsy, and then especially being like a very young female was quite.
Yeah,
it's pretty gnarly.
That sound effect, the sound effect of him cutting through the rib cage is. Ugh. And that was one of the things in the special features. They said like when they did the assembly cut, when they put it all together and watched it before the reshoots, and it was like a 3-hour version or something, like they said that the autopsy scene was like way worse. And I'm just like, what else was in there? I mean, how much worse could it be?
45 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm liking what they did with the prison. I think that was a really good call to make it about prisoners. But were they prisoners? I mean, were they prisoners? Have you ever seen a prison where everybody just walks around freely and has no shackles and there's no jail cell, there's no escape plan, there's no idea of what I mean, nothing about it was end up being a prisoner except for the fact, well, there's the attempted rape of Ripley, but then there's also some mention of people being brutal in the past, but there's not really anything about them that makes them convicts because they're all in this brotherhood, in this monastery-esque type place. Watching the behind the scenes, it really opened my eyes to how many different writers had touched this, because they had tried to make this about a colony of monks in some sort of wooden planet before, and then the studio got nervous and said, well, that doesn't sound like a good idea, since I'm assuming mostly they killed these things with fire, and I'm like, if you have a wooden planet, it might not be very good for having a fire against the beast. But at the same time, I'm thinking, what are these guys' motivations? Like, what makes them save Ripley, help her back, care at all about anything what's going on? Like, honestly, why didn't they just lock themselves in that room and wait for help to come?
Well, I mean, I have theories about that like it gets pretty deep into what I think the themes of the movie are and like what Fincher was trying to do, and also like the general kind of structure of like a trilogy. I mean, I can dive into that right now, but
Yeah, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because I have some thoughts on the what a trilogy means too. Because
okay.
I think that you're touching on a very interesting point that this
Yeah.
happens to be the third one, and what that means for a filmmaker. So yeah, kick it off.
I think that when you look at like a trilogy like this one, or also like one that I think you can compare it very, very easily to, like the Dark Knight trilogy, you've got like the first movie that's the birth, the beginning of the concept of the story, and then the second film, which is like the fight, the big battle. You've got like birth, and then you've got life in a sense, where you're struggling and you're fighting the good fight, and things are escalating, which is very much the way that Alien goes into Aliens. Then the third movie is more about death, basically, like the kind of end of life and looking back on the fight and realizing that everything ends essentially. And that's true with this movie. It's true with Dark Knight Rises. And then that structure itself is like, it's as old as written stories. Beowulf is that same kind of structure. He fights what's his name?
Grendel.
Grendel, and then the second installment's Grendel's mother, and then the final installment's like he fights that dragon and he dies. And he's like an old man at that point. So I think that what Fincher wanted to do was focus on, like an end of life story for Ripley and her looking back on the mistakes that she made and having the survivor's guilt and accepting the fact that this monster that she's been fighting with this whole time, which basically is like the embodiment of death. You can't defeat death. You can't escape death. Like in the end, you have to accept it. And I think that that's like that ties into the big theme of this movie and all the nihilism that surrounds it. And this idea of like, you're at a place where there is no hope and you've lost everything. And it's like, what do you do in that situation? And I think that ties into the prisoners and what they represent, because her first interaction with Dylan in the cafeteria, I think, kind of says it all. He says something about we're waiting, and she says, "What are you waiting for?" And he hesitates, and they all kind of look at each other for a second, and then he says, "Oh well, we're waiting for God to come back to redeem His children or whatever." But the reality is that they're waiting for death. Obviously, I mean, there's nothing else coming for them, but they can't rejoin the world because they're too, outside of it at this point.
Okay, so if they're outside of the world, yet they're still keeping the operation going, because they mentioned something about being a sort of skeleton crew to keep the lead works going.
I think that was just a deal they struck with whoever was in charge, saying like, well, we don't want to go back. We don't want to go to some other prison. Can we just stay here? And they were like, well, all right, if you kind of keep the place going, fine.
That ties back to the Nostromo, because the Nostromo in the first Alien movie was a mining refinery type ship. It was picking up ore, and when they nuked it, they mentioned in Aliens that the cost of the ship plus the cost of the ore that was on it was in the billions of dollars, and how could you do that? And then they decided to send her back to the same planet. I don't understand that, but at the same time, it did thematically tie 1 and 3 together, making it mining related, because it was very much the roughneck type crew. Also, they should have trimmed out probably about 10 characters from the prison and made it a smaller group of people. It probably would have been easier to focus on and get to know some people. And then if you
agree,
it follows a similar path. There's some sort of small event that happens, and then there's some exposition, and then there's a meeting at a table over dinner in all 3 movies. They happen at the Nostromo. They all have dinner together when they first wake up and start talking about stuff. And then it happens in Aliens when they're headed to the planet with all the Marines making jokes, and Bishop does the iconic knife thing. And then in this one, they come to this hall, and the difference between the three movies is in the first two, they're all together at one table. But in the third one, they're all separate, and there's no like unifying meal to like have everybody be on the same team. That doesn't happen in Alien 3 until the very end when they're sitting in a room listening to Ripley about what do we do, and then they come up with their wacky plan that doesn't work. But at the same time, that's the only time that you see them get together as a group to try to actually solve a problem. Other than that, it's kind of piecemeal, and there's some people. I think there's the one funny joke. I can't remember the actor's name when the alien rips the guy out of his shoes, the warden out of his boots, basically, and pulls him up into the roof, and then all the blood comes shooting down. It's
I love that part when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's really really good, comically timed. It's good. But yeah, there's some things that I see in all three movies that kind of make me wonder if somebody had written the original treatment thinking that way. Those elements got kept into the movie. Then whoever came in afterwards like kind of added stuff to it that didn't necessarily harken back to the other two movies.
It would be interesting to read all the scripts. I would be fascinated to check that out. But
there are some of the scripts apparently that are online that people have read about. Joe Blow did a good video breakdown of what happened to this movie. They have a good series called WTF. They pick all kinds of different movies and actors and just talk about it. And one of them is Alien 3, where they talk about some of the ideas that were going to be enacted before this. There was like the wooden planet with the monks, and then there was a space prison, and then there was going to be some gas that leaked out that killed everybody or something like that. But yeah, all these different ideas. But to thematically tie everything together, the things that work for me, and I really like what you said about the Dark Knight trilogy, because I feel like it follows that arc very well, where the second one is kind of like the most loved by, I would say, probably people between like 18 and like 50 or something like that. But like, if you talk to my dad, he's like, the first one is the best. He's like, yeah, Aliens is great, but like when I was a kid, we would rent the first Alien because he was like, this movie is the best. And so I think there's kind of some of generational stuff, and also just like what you grew up watching and what you like about, what you like in movies.
I mean, they're both so good. It's I mean, I have a hard time even picking a favorite between Alien and Aliens. They're both magnificent for different reasons. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they are good for different reasons, but the one thing that stands out to me is their character development in both of the movies. You get a sense of who those people are pretty quickly. And then the pace at which they remove characters that are not really, important to the story is very good as well, because they get rid of people that don't need to be there very quickly. Yeah. That efficiency, or whatever you want to call that, is important to the pacing of the story, because you could argue that Alien 3, the special edition, and the director's cut of Alien both have this thing where there's a lot of extra footage, there's a lot of extra exposition, there's a lot of extra story. Does the audience actually get any answers from any of that stuff? Not really. You don't really get to know who this company is or what their motivations are in any of the movies. Even Burke in Aliens is kind of like, oh, I'm just in it for the money, but you don't really know what the motivations of the company are. They say things like bioweapon and stuff like that, but you're not really sure if that's what he's guessing they're going to be after, or if they actually are after that for that. And I don't know if we want to talk about Resurrection in this at all.
Oh, God.
I mean,
I kind of just treat Resurrection like it doesn't exist. Although I enjoy it. It's fine, but for me, it kind of ends at Alien 3, I guess. And I lump everything else, like Resurrection and Alien versus Predator and all that stuff, is kind of like
I saw extra. Alien vs. Predator 2 with you, I think.
With me, yeah. That is the only time I have seen that one. I will revisit the other one, the first AVP, now and again, because I think it is fun and whatever. It's
I rolled
goofy,
my eyes pretty hard.
It's enjoyable.
Is it enjoyable? I can't remember if it's any good at all.
It's over the top and ridiculous. I mean, the lead hero ends up with like, I think, armor made out of like an alien exoskeleton, and she's like fighting alongside the Predator, and it's just like, it's so dumb, but it's it's fun. Unlike AVP Requiem, which was just like, oh god, I just want to claw my eyes out. so redundant and unnecessary, and like nothing interesting about it at all.
Well, yeah. I mean, those
sorry, whoever made that movie.
Those movies were made off of a passing scene and sort of a joke from Predator 2, right? Like there was really no connection between any of these properties until they happened to see a xenomorph-esque shape inside of the ship at the end of Predator 2, right? So.
And that's when, like, Sigourney Weaver says, she was like, it sounds like a video game or something to me. I don't want to be a part of that. So I'm like, I don't blame you.
Well, video game movies don't have the best track record, so I'll give her that.
Yeah.
And ironically, that video game is actually pretty fun, so.
Yeah, it's just very fun.
Going back to Alien 3, here's a random thing. They're into, those desk toys that you see, like, on people's desks? Like the thing that drinks the water?
Mm-hmm.
They have that.
Yep.
And then I noticed that in Aliens too. Now I have to go back and watch Alien and see if they have something like that too, because yeah,
it's super prominent in Alien. It's like, that's what I thought you were referring to when you brought it up.
Oh, really?
I don't even remember noticing it in Alien 3. Yeah,
it's on the warden's desk too. So like they have these like random desk toys. I thought that was an interesting thing. Like, what the hell is that all about?
Yeah, the warden's constantly squeezing that stress ball too. I always thought that was kind of funny.
Oh, interesting. I didn't pick up on that one. The second act, though, is where I think things kind of start falling apart for the movie, because I start asking questions about what the alien's motivation is. What is the motivation of the alien in the other movies? It's pretty poorly defined in the first movie. The second movie, the drone hive colony thing starts making a lot more sense. Like, there's logic to it. And then we kind of go back to this senseless killing machine in the third.
Yeah.
Until it starts to sense the queen inside of Ripley, then it kind of sort of brings it back into perspective of why it's there. But the order of operations doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's always been the question. It's like, is this thing eating them, or is it just likes killing? I don't know. Is it just like insanely territorial, or because it totally breaks down at the end when it starts just killing everybody. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but that's one thing that always kind of didn't make sense to me. And this ties back into what you're saying about like having too many characters and then not killing them off kind of in the right speed and order, because it's just like, it's the end of the movie, I'm just gonna kill all of you now. Like, I get that they're trapping it and cornering it, but it's a little bit like, I don't know, convenient for the plot, I guess, that it suddenly is like, kill everyone.
Well, you're right, it furthers the plot, right? But it doesn't really make sense. Because you'd think that if the queen was on the way, it would change its behavior and say, let's start pinning dudes against the wall with the guck. And then, getting them ready for the face huggers and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
To make the speed. So I thought, not to get into the to the what we would have done yet, but I think if they had changed the motivation of the alien to be this sort of thing that's killing things to then doing that, it would have just made a lot of sense, and it would have been like, oh, that's what's going on. Because I spent a lot of the movie just trying to figure out what the hell was going on, to tell you the truth. Like, it doesn't make sense, like what's happening. How does the company know that this thing is there? How does it know that Ripley being there means there's an alien there? Like, none of it makes sense until you see this guy typing on a keyboard and he's telling people, oh yeah. So it's just like, it's got some problems. But what do you think about the candle scene?
Oh, the candle scene. So that's probably one of my like least favorite parts, because in the theatrical version, like, they don't even explain what they're doing. Like, they cut out that little moment where they say like, all right, go light all these candles, because they're lighting them for Murphy, right? Like, it's a memorial or something. Is that what I don't even know what they're doing, to be honest.
I don't either. And they said something about their guidance,
I think
so
that
they don't know where they are. But I was like, what?
I think I would have to go back, but I thought I heard somebody say, go light this many candles for Murphy or something like that. And it's like, that seems weird. Like, why would you do that? No one's going to see him. Well, I don't know. That scene doesn't make any sense. It's not explained very well. It goes back to the monastery
feel, right? Where there's these competing themes where they're trying to make it feel like it's some sort of Benedictine monastery, but at the same time, they're prisoners, right?
Well, that's one of the things that got lost from the Wood Planet script that I wish was more a part of it. The whole religious aspect. I think they reference it a little, but it's not there in the way that it sounds like it was in the script, where it would have been like just the fact that they view it as the devil or a dragon or something. I think would have made it interesting, and the way that supposedly they were going to have Ripley start hallucinating, sort of as a symptom of her pregnancy, quote unquote, and kind of like maybe buying in a little bit to their like religious view of the alien. I wish that was in this movie more, but c'est la vie. It's just, I don't know. To go back really quick to what you were saying earlier, just before we move on, about the motive of the alien and the kind of order of operations and the mythology of it and stuff. I think honestly, like, Fincher just wasn't really that interested in the alien itself. I think he was more interested in the characters, the human characters, and I think he was more interested in, like, obviously mood, but the theme, and then also like reverting back to Ridley Scott's kind of structure, where it's just like, it's a monster, you know, we're not going to explain everything that it does. It's just, it's basically the personification of death, like, coming at these people. And Cameron definitely went way more into like, how does it work and why is it the way it is? And that's like, it makes sense because that's the kind of storyteller that James Cameron is. But I think it's Fincher clearly just wasn't that interested in going down that path. And it doesn't work still because it's not as tight as Ridley Scott's story. It's not as scary. It's not as effective as a story, as like sort of like the haunted house in space kind of gothic science fiction that the original Alien was. I think that's what he wanted to get back to a little bit, but it just doesn't quite work.
Well, two things on that. Very good point. You got me thinking. Was the puppet, the guys that were manipulating the puppet, it almost looked like a second unit in the behind the scenes. I don't remember seeing Fincher even there looking at the camera.
He's there at one point. He basically just tells them to like move the puppet faster. He's like, just move it until you guys are like running into each other and your arms are sore or something, which is why it's like it moves so like crazy, because he wanted it to be faster and faster. Okay. But yeah, I think other than that, they were kind of like doing their own thing.
Because I don't think he's ever done another monster type movie.
No.
Right? They're only human movies. I mean, kind of, they have an element of horror to them, but they're always kind of grounded in reality to a certain degree.
Yeah, I think it's a shame, but this one might have soured him on that whole genre. It would be nice to see him, you know, as the David Fincher that he is now, to do another monster movie, but I don't think it'll ever happen.
That's too bad. I think the point that you just made right there, that's really kind of changed my perspective on the whole thing. Yeah, very interesting. Because you're right, yeah. He's there to tell the story about the prisoners and like what they are, and that's very akin to his other movies that are. Yeah. I don't think there's a bad one. I can't think of one off the top of my head that I don't like. Yeah. And so seeing it that way, you got a very good point. The sparklers. There's a scene in the beach where they're picking up survivors, quote unquote, or looking for survivors, where they definitely have flashlights. All of a sudden, they're using these sparkler candles. And then there's also a scene later on where the two guys are in a storeroom when they're going to go battle the beast, and they're tasked with finding batteries for the flashlights instead of painting the gasoline or whatever it was on the walls, the napalm. I was like, what the hell is this? Is this some sort of visual thing? Like, because then I started thinking about the weapons that they used in Aliens and how the flash from the guns was so iconic and so cool looking, and the sounds that the guns make were like normal guns. And so I have this note where I drew a gun and then I drew one of those sparklers, and I'm like, those things are not equivalent. So what were they trying to get from that? Like, because at one point Ripley tries to use it as a sort of a weapon against the xenomorph, but it doesn't really make sense. I don't know. What do you think about these sparklers? What the hell are they there for? Why are they using them?
I mean, I didn't notice the thing about the flashlights at the beginning. That could just be another mistake, or maybe it's like they only had enough batteries for like 2 flashlights or something, and then at the end they're like, well, we're all gonna need them, so we're gonna need more batteries. I don't know. The sparklers, yeah, it's probably just like, oh well, this will be an interesting visual variation rather than just flashlights. I mean, Fincher's definitely, he uses light in a lot of dynamic ways, which I think when you look at the movie as a whole, you notice that towards the end, the visual aspect of it really starts to degrade, especially during the chase at the end, where it's just like it's all these sort of like flat fluorescent lights. I don't know if they're fluorescent, but whatever they are, they're not very interesting looking. And it's a contrast to the earlier half of the movie, which I think is very, it's much more in line with Fincher's visual style. I saw something about the original cinematographer had to leave because he had Parkinson's, and they were like, this is not working, so they had to replace him with somebody else who I think couldn't match it. So there's generally an kind of unevenness about the visuals of it, which sucks, because like some of it is really good and then some of it is kind of not so good, kind of bland looking, and I think that's definitely more towards the end of the movie. But yeah, the sparklers, probably just he thought it was something a little bit different to light the scene with, and it ties back into the idea that they don't have much working technology there, although the flashlights at the beginning does seem to contradict that.
I thought I
don't
saw
know.
that on the beach and I was like, okay. And then later on, I'm thinking, why are they running around with these makeshift torches that look extremely inefficient? Like it would have probably been
You probably
better.
just thought it looked cool.
Yeah, I think it was, and that's why I wrote the what's up with the sparklers note here, because I'm like,
Yeah.
they're trying to make it look cool. I don't know. It just seems kind of like this weird thing that they chose. Things I thought were cool in the second act, the Bishop scene, bringing him back like half a face is pretty awesome. And then basically saying, kill me at the end of it, and
Yeah.
and then
I'll never be top of the line again.
yeah, he's like pretty much look at me. Yeah, he's pretty bad. The audio in that scene is hard to hear. I had to turn it up a lot. I think they did mention there was some additional dialogue that they had to record later on because things were hard to hear for whatever reason. And then they actually, one of the analyses I saw, they talked about Bane in Dark Knight Rises having a similar issue, that they had to re-record all the dialogue and, letting people hear you and things like that is just kind of like this decision that the director makes, but then it could be the wrong one. And so you have to get, make sure you're checking your work, I guess, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah. Yeah, they said they had issues with getting the mix right between the music and the sound effects, and the audio for the dialogue wasn't recorded as well as it could have been. And you can hear it definitely in some parts.
Yeah, what do you know what was going on with that? Because I thought for a movie with, not only is it the third one in the franchise, but there's a lot of anticipation, it's got a lot of money. It seemed like a very weird thing to have go wrong.
I don't know. I mean, they say it sort of felt like they were setting out to make a deadline rather than make a movie. So I would just assume it's the same issue that they have with not having really a finished script or anything. It was just like it had been in pre-production hell for so long that they were just like, just fucking make the movie. Like we need the money. The studio, I guess, was not doing so well, and they were like, we need this to be a hit, and we need it to like be a hit right now. So go make it. And Fincher was willing to do it, but not willing to compromise. And then, that's another topic. But yeah, some movies just, some things don't come out quite as well as you would think they would, even if it's a huge studio production.
Yeah, I was surprised by the fact that they didn't fix that right away. The CGI, let's talk a little bit about that, because you mentioned the lighting. I saw another thing in the behind the scenes. They spoke of adding shadows in to make the xenomorph crawling on the ceiling and stuff like that look a little bit more realistic.
Yeah.
And then there was like basically only one other CGI shot where they had the cracks of form on its head when the lead was poured on it. But I thought Terminator 2 had come out in the year before, so they were probably making this movie while that movie had come out, and to have that level of sophistication in your special effects in that movie, and then to be releasing this with, you know, relatively small amount of special effects, it just kind of shows you how off they were. Like they were just not in the same universe at all. It was James Cameron knew what the future was going to be, and it seems like 20th Century Fox just had no clue. And so then they kind of tried to bring in some stuff to do some cool shots, but it's just really strange to me that they're not able to see that coming. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is weird that there's not more of the creature in it, and that it's not. There's very little to even suggest that this is taking place even in the future or like out in space. Like at a certain point in the movie, it's just like guys running around like a factory that looks like it doesn't even look like a set. Like it just looks like it could be like an actual factory that they got to film in. And then they added some like automatic doors, but that's it. And I don't know if that's an issue of them going over budget, but you watch the featurettes and it's like, oh, we're building all this stuff, and they were obviously making stuff, but I don't know. They didn't have somebody like.
Was this Sid Mead from Blade Runner? Was he a part of Alien 3 or just part of 2?
There was somebody that was on Blade Runner. I'm not sure, but it's funny you bring that up because I was just about to say like there. I don't know if you know that anecdote of when Ridley Scott was making Blade Runner, and I think it's the scene in the office and when Rachel's being tested by Deckard, and there's like the lighting on the walls that's like looks like water rippling or whatever. The pillars in that scene, apparently everyone showed up to shoot or whatever, and like Ridley Scott was like, that turn those pillars upside down, like. So there was nobody on the set of Aliens like Ridley Scott who was able to be like, no, this needs to look like more distinct. And I think that's like one of the main failings is like Fincher probably just had too much else on his plate battling with the studio, and there wasn't a visionary kind of set designer who was able to make it look more interesting. I think the alien looks good. The suit looks good. I even like the alien vision stuff at the end.
Well, that's my next note. You just took the words out of my mouth because the POV becomes kind of iconic. There's three things in this movie that I thought were like, this is something that I remember about this particular movie.
I think that became cliche after this movie, but I think at the time when it came out, it was something new. And I remember thinking it was awesome when I was a kid. Yes. I still think when you watch it now, if you can divorce yourself from the fact that like it got used in a lot of other like worse movies, it's still cool. It still looks good.
Just to talk about that a little bit, the iconic parts of this movie, because there are some. The meeting of Ripley and her turning her head away from the alien when it comes face to face with her is very. That's been used a lot to describe these movies. But going back a little bit to the CGI, I have a note here that says this was 10 years too early, maybe. But then I also have another note that says the CGI did not help the recent Alien movies at all. So maybe that's not even a big factor because it seems like all of them. 8 of them that have been made since have been just terrible, and they have not had any. I'm lumping the Predator movies in there too. It doesn't seem to help. So maybe there's something about going back, kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning, to the old style and trying to make it that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're probably dead on in that it was just at a time when the technology wasn't there, and they were trying something else with the puppets and stuff. I mean. I'm sure part of the reason why the CGI looks so shitty in Alien Covenant, for example, is like the budget just isn't there because these movies have had like diminishing returns ever since. I mean, I think Prometheus kind of that one made
Talking about
some
Prometheus.
money.
Oh,
That one
God.
had some popularity and it kind of brought the franchise back a little bit, but then right after it was like people were like, nah, fuck this, because so many people didn't like Prometheus even though they went to see it.
I'm one of those
But
people.
yeah, I like parts of it, but yeah, it's fucking stupid at other parts. But yeah, I think maybe it was too early. The CGI wasn't there yet, and like if it had been made a little bit later, they would have put the budget into it to do something really cool with it. But at this point in time, maybe all the money that they put into it, you know, the technology wasn't quite there yet. I mean, also just like James Cameron is always ahead of the curve with everything. So
Yeah,
trying to comparing anything to what he does as far as visual effects go, it's like it's not even fair.
So let's go talk about Prometheus a little bit, because it seemed like the first director that they brought in, they wanted to do a Prometheus type movie, or at least a movie about the space jockey, which I thought was interesting because I didn't know that far back they were talking about doing that, and it took almost 20 years for Prometheus to come out. I think it came out in 2013, and then it was just so wrong on how they did that. And I think one of the critiques I saw of it was right on when they said, you know, little tidbits that Ridley put in the movie or whatever, it intrigued your imagination, but your imagination is always going to be better than whatever somebody comes up with a story about it, which in some sense is true and sad and kind of tragic. But on the other sense, I think there are talented enough people out there to go do this stuff, but I think the studios get in the way sometimes, or they hire the wrong people.
Yeah.
I will say, not to branch over into superhero movies, but the Dark Phoenix movies are a really good example of hiring the exact same guy twice to do the same story, failing twice, and then being like scratching your head and just saying like, why did they do that? It's almost like they had like a favor that they owed somebody, or I don't really get that, but
oh yeah, I'm sure that's part of it.
Yeah, so it's a little quid pro quo or something like that. But then Fincher comes in, and then he's young, and everyone's like, "Fuck this guy." He's like, does Madonna videos. Like, what does he know about this like old timey filmmaking process of, you know, guys that are doing rotoscoping and stuff like that?
Yeah. They thought they had someone they could control, I think.
But they didn't even have a script, so he's just making stuff up and then trying to slap it together. And so they're really trying hard to make something like the first one in this that doesn't have any similarity at all. In fact, they kill most of the people off from part 2, so they get away from that completely. Then they bring in Bishop for a little bit, but he can't even function. And then they basically just said, what can we do to make this like a horror, scary space movie?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you also have to factor in there's so many factors involved in like creating this movie, but Sigourney Weaver's stance on not wanting to make another movie with bigger guns, like basically she was like, I don't want to make Aliens Part 2, like just more guns and more fighting, because I think she's also, at least at the time, was very anti-gun. So I think she was a big voice saying like, I want to go back to not having weapons and then sort of fighting the alien, like being outmatched by the alien in a sense.
Interesting.
Which,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's part of it, I think. I mean, she's co-producer on this one. She definitely had like the cachet at that point, and they obviously wanted her back, you know, so they're kind of like willing to do whatever, I'm sure, to make sure she was happy.
I think she got paid $11 million for the next one, so it's. I think she's happy.
Yeah.
She's probably just fine. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the end now, the third act, because I think that's where this movie, for me, really just kind of takes a shit. It doesn't really tie anything together. And I got a note here, and I'd like to start with this. why does Ripley's life have to end so tragically? Why does she have to go through fighting the alien, then having her daughter die because she was out in space for so long, and then having to go get back to the alien planet, get fucked up again, then having her new family be killed, and then she ultimately gets impregnated by... Also, where's the second egg? So if the ox got impregnated by the xenomorph, then where's the other one that impregnated her? That didn't make any sense.
Yeah, no. Well, I just assume it's on the ship somewhere, but you don't see it. I don't know.
How did she get out of the ship onto the beach?
During the credits, you sort of see like it looks like she's being put into an escape pod or something like that, which is a little vague.
She's basically naked on the beach when they find her.
Oh, I don't know.
And then also they bring the entire ship from the ocean back into the prison.
There's a shot where it's on a crane.
How did they do that?
In the theatrical cut. I don't know if that's I can't remember if it's in the special edition or not.
Anyway, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, there's like 20
I
guys
do have
here.
to say since you circled back to that briefly, I fucking love how haggard Sigourney Weaver looks in the beginning. Like the makeup and like her performance is so good. The red eye. She just looks like absolute shit. It's like, oh,
which also, I have another note here that it says the timeline here for the gestation of the queen is how long exactly? Because how long is she? Long. Her eye all of a sudden is better by the second act, and then you're kind of like, well, wait a minute, what happened there? And then but you're right. The beginning first act with her looking beat to shit is pretty awesome. I agree.
She's so good. She's so good at it too.
I have a feeling just like there's something deleted that we missed because that whole sequence kind of has some missing parts to it.
Yeah, there's probably extra. I mean, they say in the special features like they were shooting like alternate versions of everything because they're like, well, we don't know where the story's gonna go later, so we just need to have all sorts of different stuff.
That's gotta be so frustrating to just like flying by night and then not having any idea what you're gonna do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they said that that's not totally unusual. I mean, it's not common, but it's not unprecedented. But the fact that the studio was relying so much on this being a big hit was like, it was just like a perfect storm of chaos because they wouldn't leave him alone.
Sounds like my job. The okay, so third act, it's a little bit blurry between the second and third because there's no clear transition. Then I have a note here that says that Rock is cool. I'm talking about Charles Dutton because whenever I see that character, I think of this show from the early 90s that he was in called Rock, and that's like what I've always called him every time I see him.
I don't think I've ever seen that show.
He was on the air for like one season. I don't know if anybody would ever know that reference, but
he is awesome. I love him.
He's awesome. He definitely kind of steals the show towards the end and taking charge. He has a kind of a throwaway line where he's like, I'm here to like help you guys, but like I'm not here to like take charge of things, which allows Ripley to take charge of things, which allows the story to progress into the next couple of ideas. But the fact that he is like beating people that are attacking her with the pipe and like being this protector and then like being her right hand man and like helping her set up all these things, and then when the opportunity comes for him to like lead, he's like, no, I don't want to do that. It's kind of odd.
I think it's very like real. I don't know. I mean, I always kind of like that because there are a lot of people who are that way. I think who are like protectors and they're very like they know like right from wrong and they're very willing to like step up if the moment requires. They don't want to assume a leadership role. They don't want to have that like title over them for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So he's like a middle manager, like a right-hand man or something like that. And then, but the problem with that is that at the end, he's telling Ripley like what to do. And he's like, you need to get out of here. You have to go do that. And so he kind of, then he takes charge, when shit's about to hit the fan, which could also be interpreted as like him protecting her, which is back to his character. So I suppose that makes sense.
It's still like what I was saying. Like, it's like, those types of people, like they have a very strong sense of what is right and wrong, and when the moment arises, they just act. They don't really think about it, but they're like, if you ask them to be in charge, they're gonna say no.
Right. Yeah. And
I don't know.
I agree with
That's
you.
that's my interpretation anyway.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's talk about the hallway trapping scene of confusion, I'll call it, because nothing about that scene you have no frame of reference of where you are. I feel like in the other movies they are always map driven. They always sit in a room at some point, go over the map, go over the battle plan, come up with an idea. They show you like, oh, we got to block off this corridor, this corridor, this corridor, whatever, right? In this one, they kind of just tell you that's what they're going to do. Then they do it, and then it's a mismatch of doors shutting, people saying yes, alien POV, people screaming at each other. Then all of a sudden, they end up in some sort of chamber. So you're like, you're thinking to yourself, like, why did they all just go to that chamber and then climb out and then dump the lead on it? Like, why have this crazy maze? Why add that complexity to it? I get that it makes it a little bit more interesting, but I felt like the execution was really bad.
I mean, I agree. I think that it works for like a short period of time, but then it quickly gets very repetitive and kind of like, it's like, okay, I get that the idea is that they're also lost and confused and they don't know where they're going, but it's like it just goes on too long.
If only they had their candles to find the way.
Yeah, they're sparklers. Who's to know really, but I mean I could see that being like the studio saying like, well, you got to have a chase, you got to have, because they were very like, you got to have these certain beats from the other movies, and maybe Fincher was just like not that interested in doing that, and maybe he was a little lackluster about pulling it off. But yeah, I like it. I like certain aspects of it. Like I like the alien POV, and for a short while, I think it's really exciting them being chased around. But then it just gets old. And it's like I said, everything looks the same.
Yes.
I kept thinking like, I love the set of the infirmary with all the white and those like plastic drapes and stuff. I think that set is so cool, and like it's a shame that like at a certain point in the movie it just never comes back. Like you never see that again. And I was thinking, I mean, this could go under one of their what would we do differently, but it would have been more interesting, I think, if they maybe attempted to catch it and then it just like totally failed, and then it kind of turned into it just chasing them all over that complex, and like you would see those sets again, so that there would at least be a little more variety in like the look of it. But yeah, those corridors, it's just, it gets very monotone and repetitive, and it's I agree, it sucks. And it's also like the worst visually, like the lights in those tunnels, like they're not dynamic looking really. Like it's a shame. And I also wonder, was that part of reshoots? Was that like when they're running way over budget and they're running out of money and they're like, get this done cheaper and get it done faster, and who knows?
I think you're right. But it feels like that. It feels like, oh, we need some filler here to make this like end battle scene have more heft to it, because if we just trap it too easily, then it would be like, oh, what was the point? That wasn't very hard. Yeah, the pouring lead on top of it and it not dying. How did you feel about that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm always wondering, and I still wonder to this day, when she hits it with the water, does it explode? Is the lead still on it, or is it getting the lead? I guess it's getting it off. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
unclear.
We know they're super tough, and the exoskeleton is like, their blood is acid, so their internal temperature must be pretty high already, I would assume, unless maybe it's not hot, maybe it's just acidic. I guess that one doesn't necessarily mean the other.
You're saying that because it has acid for blood, that its internal temperature would be that of molten lead?
I don't know. You know what this shit more than I do.
Therefore, it could swim through probably what would be close to 40 feet of molten lead. That apparently, because lead to me is heavy. It's really, really thick. The density is high, and the temperature for which you have to melt it is actually not that high. I think you can melt it at pretty low temperature, but it's still going to be painful to go through. And so when it springs out of it, like no big deal, I was like, wait a minute, what the hell? And then, yeah, I think with the idea of hitting it with the water, they added that CGI scene in to show it cracking because they were like, oh, this is confusing. Why the hell does it explode with a stick of dynamite as soon as the water hits this thing? Like,
Yeah.
Are people going to put it together that's like rapid expansion of the lead or whatever? And would that really make that happen? Would it internally explode like that?
Probably not.
Yeah,
Probably not.
like, you know, sometimes my car door gets cold and it sticks, but it doesn't explode when I heat it back up.
Does this come out after Terminator 2?
So
or is it before?
I'm sorry, it did come out, but they were filming it while Terminator 2 is coming out. And there's I have that note in here that they were concerned about the death scene of Ripley looking like T-1000, which they don't at all. They just happen to be.
Which I never thought that, but I did think like, oh, well, they're just copying the scene when the T-1000 explodes because it's, you know, frozen, and then he shoots it.
Oh, interesting.
That was always my thought, was like, oh, they just want it to. That's the trend. That's is the like,
you know, baby moment.
Yeah.
But she doesn't say anything cool.
No.
Huh.
No.
The Terminator 2 thing is interesting. I think we talked about it a little bit more because that movie had come out this summer before. Let's talk a little bit about the box office that this thing was up against at the time. I looked through the top 10 movies of the year that year. There were 3 sequels that were in the top 10. Lethal Weapon 3, which it opened in the same month as Home Alone 2, and I can't remember the third one off the top of my head. But this movie could have made a lot of money.
Wasn't Batman Returns up there too?
You're right, that's what it is, Batman Returns. Yeah. And so I think if anybody was trying to say, oh, people were fatigued by this or anything like that, that's not the right answer. What seems like to me is that it was just a lot of story plot holes. And the reason that they had a lot of story plot holes is because they didn't have a script. They started shooting it. They didn't have a really good understanding of where they wanted the film to go, where they wanted the franchise to go. And to kill off your main character,
I think it was just too much of a bummer. That's what I remember. It's funny because it's another example of being maybe too soon. Not, you mentioned it over the visual effects aspect, but just Fincher's own vision, like the world wasn't ready for it yet, obviously. But it would become very successful with Seven and Fight Club and, like, you know, Dragon Tattoo, and all the movies he's made since then have a very grim, and not all of them, but most of them have a very grim atmosphere to them.
That's a good point.
And this one it came out at a time when it was like, not, people didn't want to see that, I don't think.
They wanted to see Lethal Weapon 3.
Yeah. And not even just Fincher. Like, I mean, nowadays you've got like Black Mirror and fucking Game of Thrones and like all this stuff that's just, it's a bummer, but like people like watching it. I don't think people at the time liked watching, you know, nihilistic things.
Well, because Batman Returns got kind of a similar treatment because it was so much darker than the first one, and it was people were turned off by that, but it still made a boatload of money. I think they were
I mean
$50 million.
That's a little different because that's supposed to be like a kids movie, but still, yeah, it was too dark for people.
Number 1 movie of the year was Aladdin. And the second movie of the year was The Bodyguard. So when I was looking at the Wikipedia page for all the movies that had come out in 92, I was quite impressed by the amount of movies that were like really good that had come out that year. So
it's like Unforgiven was like right under, it's like right below Alien 3, I think, in like the ranking of maybe worldwide box office or something like that.
Oh, really? Interesting. Huh. As far as sci-fi movies that came out that year, there weren't a lot, which I thought was interesting. So maybe sci-fi, I feel like today you can have multiple sci-fi movies released during a year and they'll all do pretty good. But maybe sci-fi at that point was not as mature of a genre. It was kind of still, I wouldn't say infancy, but I'll call it like adolescence or something like that. But I'll lump like superhero movies into sci-fi sort of because I feel like there's a lot of crossover there. But at the same time, there seems to be a lot more appetite for it today.
So I did some breakdowns of like budgets and box office, and then I adjusted like for inflation. what I found was that the budgets for Aliens and this is all kind of to illustrate the point of like why this movie was deemed a failure, although it still technically was successful. Like at bottom line, like it still made them a bunch of money. Alien, if you adjust for inflation, was made for about $41 million, and Aliens was made for about $50 million. This movie, Alien 3, was made for $93 million if you adjust for inflation. So it's like double the cost of Aliens.
Wow.
Basically, they say like if you want to find out how much a movie actually made, you got to double the budget first to account for like
Marketing and things like that, right?
Marketing and what the chunk that like theaters take and stuff. Well, Aliens profit was 250 million, and then Alien 3 was 100 million profit. So
it's over.
It's not losing money. It's not losing money, but it's like you're starting to see the diminishing returns already for a movie that you paid double for. You're making less back.
Yeah, less than half. Wow.
But at the end of the day, it's like, well, it still made money, so we'll still make a sequel. Like it's kind of the way it works. And then just for like context, I guess, for like present day, I tried to look up some movies that were like similar range of profit or budget versus box office, and it was actually really hard to find something. But the Meg was made for 130 million, and that profited 270 million.
That movie cost 130 million dollars.
I guess so. I haven't seen it, but yeah. But then like Glass they made for 20 million, so like, you know, super cheap by comparison. That profited, the box office was 246, which is close to Alien 3, but the profit was like 200 million because they made it for so cheap.
Yeah, I've been to his house. It's very obvious that he has a lot of money.
Yeah. But it's funny because like if you look at those two movies, which they were sort of close in terms of box office, 296, I think, versus 246. Alien 3 ranks number 12 for the year of 1992, and Glass ranks number 34 for 2018. So it's interesting to me to see and this is like a whole other topic, but the fact that there are way more movies that are making way more money, even though they say, you know, the theater is like dying or whatever. It's like there's a lot more big blockbuster tentpole movies now, I guess.
You might even say they're being a bit dramatic.
Yeah, maybe.
I think that's actually interesting analysis. So that makes me think that there's more competition nowadays than there was back then, even with all these movies that we were talking about, right? That were coming out.
I mean, I think that the argument is that small movies are not able to even carve out like any kind of success, which is maybe that does hold up. Is that like back in 92 there were more movies that were, you know, being seen by audiences that weren't these big gigantic movies, but nowadays it's like the studios know they have to make those if they want to make any money, so they don't put as much into small movies. But small movies still get out. I mean, A24, that's like all they make. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a trend in the other direction now because of A24.
Yeah.
And then most recently, I think A24 backed Invisible Man too. But that's now they're making a Wolfman from that, and I think you're going to see a resurgence of the like $20 to $50 million movie come out because it's you know, if we're not,
I mean, they have to now, especially with the pandemic and stuff. Right. They're going to have to start making smaller movies.
Exactly, to get people to pay for them online, right? Okay, last subject, and then we'll call it.
Okay.
What I would have done. So I'd like to hear what you would have changed to make this movie your own. It can be big or small, but what would you have changed in this movie to make it different?
I would definitely have, like I said before, brought that whole idea of the religious vision of the alien. I would have brought that out front more, because the prisoners are all religious. You know, they have this religion, but it's like it doesn't really affect the story or the the mood even that much. I mean, it's sort of like background to what's going on, which is still, Ripley fighting this thing from a very practical standpoint. And I think that layer of like that other writer director wanted to add of her, because of the fact that she's been impregnated by the alien, starting to hallucinate and having a much more like kind of Boschian aesthetic, would have been really cool and would have, brought some of the character at the end of their journey, accepting death and like contemplating their mortality and spirituality and all that stuff. I think it would have made it a much richer experience. I would have enjoyed that more. I mean, it's still there kind of, but it's not. I would have liked to see more of it. Especially the like hallucinatory stuff. I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but they had like drawings of like an alien with her face in its mouth. Really, really bizarre looking. Stuff like that I think would have been cool. Probably would have kept Charles Dance around longer, like that one producer said. I mean, I probably would have, like I said, had them be less on the offensive with the alien at the end and more on the defensive, which is what I think makes Alien so exciting. And Aliens as well, like they're running away at the end. In this one, it's a bit more like they're trying to catch it, which it makes sense, but it would have been a little bit more exhilarating if you felt the desperation a bit more. But that's the funny thing about having her be pregnant with the alien, because like it removes all fear of her dying. I mean, it does give it this sort of ominous feeling of like, well, she's not going to survive or whatever. But you don't fear for her life in the same way. And when the rest of the cast is a bunch of guys that you can barely keep track of or recognize, it's like, who am I even afraid for here? So like you said, probably would have had less prisoners from the beginning, probably would have killed them off a little bit more at a faster pace, I guess. So there are fewer of them by the end. But I like the tone. I like Fincher's tone. I like the themes. I think you could have done the same themes with essentially like, Aliens Part 2, like more guns and like Hicks and the sort of family unit thing, and still have it be like the Marines versus the aliens or whatever. Like I think you could have done it that way, but I do like the idea of the story kind of becoming smaller and more personal as it is approaching like the end of Ripley's life. I do want to say before we stop that bringing up her death at the end, that is one of those shots that it doesn't matter if it's a theatrical cut or the special edition. I just think it looks goofy no matter what, of her falling into that. It just doesn't look good. And it's like
no splash. Why didn't they put a splash?
Yeah.
I mean, like, why is it just she just disappears? It's like, what were they thinking?
I'm like, is it supposed to be like flames? But like, even still, like there would be something.
Yeah.
It's really bad, and it ruins that moment, which I think otherwise is pretty good. The interesting thing they bring up about that debate of whether to have the alien pop out at the end or not, which the version you just watched, it doesn't, right?
Right, which is, it lets you down a little bit.
Well, they said it ruins it to have the alien pop out, because then it's like, well, then that she wasn't going to survive anyway. Whereas like, if it doesn't, it's like her sacrifice is like a complete sacrifice of like, which I agree with and I don't agree with, because she still made the choice, like she didn't know it was going to burst out at that moment.
That's interesting that they're trying to say that it's like this sympathy thing for Ripley, because I thought it was her making the call, like, fuck the company final, like basically like, I'm not giving this thing to you, I'm going to take myself out too to do it, to make sure.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is, but they're just saying that like, if you have the alien pop out at the end while she's falling, then it's like, well, she wouldn't have survived no matter what. So
I see.
her sacrifice is not as great, which I could see, but also it's like, well, she still made that choice to say no and to jump off the edge. So
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Okay, I have some strong opinions on this.
okay.
One, I think that Hicks never would have gotten into any escape pod without a machine gun, so there should have been some sort of machine gun in their escape pod. So I think she would have found grenades or something like that in there. And
Uh-huh.
I would have loved to have her after like she finds that she like looks over and sees something like that and is like, oh, okay, it could be as simple as like a pistol or something, but it's at least something, because to have no weapons on a colony makes no
I
sense.
see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next thing is, I've never seen a prison movie where the main motivation of the prisoners is to stay in prison, and that to me threw me. And I think it's going back to what we were talking about before. It's the conflict of multiple scripts and different people's ideas competing with each other. But the prisoners, when they hear that these guys are coming and they're going to land on the ship and all this stuff, I feel like that would have been their time to strike. Like they could have, okay, let's wait for these guys to come. And so as soon as Lance Henriksen shows up with his goons or whatever, they jump them and then try to get into the spaceship. Then the third act finishes with them up in space in the spaceship with the alien inside, wreaking havoc. And that's how the alien can get back to Earth for the fourth movie or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that they just like kill it, then she's dead, then it's like very much like we're done with this. But nobody was ready for it to be done with, so why not give it some way of continuing on? Like, because I guess I was watching this thing about Resurrection with Joss Whedon trying to figure out how he was going to write this. He's like, what do we do here? Like, she's gone, the alien's dead, like, what do we do? They nuked everything in the other movies, so there's not a lot that I can pull off of here. So they have to come up with something, and they say, oh, we cloned you from your blood. And I was watching that, and I think in the movie the planet is called Furiosa 161. I think they call it Furiosa 61 in Resurrection. I think they messed it up.
No, really?
Yeah, I have to watch it again because I was like, wait, did I hear that wrong? Or a small detail, but I thought very interesting that they couldn't even get that right. So yeah, to me, if you're going to set it on prison, the main motivation of the movie should be escape, because that's what prisoners do. For them to accept their fate and say, we're going to just die here and be lead processors, I thought was very weird. Like, I'm like, okay, why not just make them like guys that work for the company then? Why are they criminals? Nothing about that movie made them criminals to me, other than the attempted rape scene for about 15 seconds in the movie. It was quelled. Yeah. Then you never heard about it again. And then there was the Charles Dance backstory, which was very interesting, but again, he's dead, and so it doesn't really matter. Then there's Rock saying, I'm a murderer. He has the option to kill Ripley with an axe with her back turned. He chooses not to do it. So all the decision making in the movie seemed to be like counter being criminal. Like they were good. And so I was like, okay.
Yeah, they're very nice for rapists and murderers. Yeah,
they were the nicest criminals I've ever seen, and they had like camaraderie, sort of, I guess, but not really. They kind of came together at the end. But to me, if you're gonna make a prison movie, you got to make it about how they're planning on getting out of the prison. So to have it be a prison movie with no shackles, they don't get locked up, there's not shitty prison food, there's none of those tropes that maybe they could have put a twist on or whatever. But why is it a prison? You got to do an escape thing. That's you have to do that. And then the other thing is, Ripley dying makes no sense because she defeats all of the aliens. So for her to die at the end of the movie, it almost doesn't make sense. It's like she's finally defeated all of these things, so why is she now dying? It's almost like she should have just, I don't know, like killed herself at the beginning of the movie. Like as soon as she woke up, she's like, well, I have an alien inside of me. There's acid all over the place. It's not inside of Newt, so guess where it is, right? Like where else would it be? Somehow it's in the Ox, but we don't understand why or how it got there. So it has to be inside of her, right? So just by logical assumption, it's she has to kill herself. So you know that from the very beginning. She doesn't do it for whatever reason. It has some weird gestation period that doesn't make any sense. The timelines are all wonky. So you could clear all that
Yeah.
up by saying, "Hey, look, they do some sort of procedure, or they actually find out it's inside of her." It's also the first time you see that where they do a scan of somebody
CAT
and
scan.
yeah,
Yeah.
and figure out that it's in there. Like, don't you think at that point they have an autopsy room? Can't they attempt to do surgery to remove it? So there's a lot of things
Mm.
they could have done there to do that and keep her in the movie.
Well, the doctor's dead by that point, right? I mean, I don't know if anybody else is qualified to do that.
Oh, that's a good point. But again, you don't have to kill Charles Dance, right? They chose to kill
Yeah.
him, but there's no real reason
Well.
why he's dead, other than
Eh, maybe that's why they killed him. Maybe they were like, well, he's got to be dead before she finds out.
okay, that's a fair point. Maybe they're like, oh, well, then he could just remove it surgically, right? So yeah, we better
Yeah.
kill him. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe they caught their own mistake there, but I feel like they could have tricked Lance Henriksen's character very easily by removing it, pretending it's inside of her, gotten off the planet, when it's not, and then said like, oh, guess what? It's back there, and then they had the planet overloading again, and then it would have been the third nuke that gone off that had killed the alien. I mean, wouldn't that have been a nice conclusion there? It's like they're flying away and then they nuke the planet again, and then it's like the final alien is finally dead. Everybody's nuked.
Yeah.
You did nukes in 3 movies to kill this thing, and then Lance Henriksen doesn't get what he wants, and they're all going back to Earth. I mean, you could have solved these things, right? But instead, it's like, we're gonna make it super sad. Some pretty hard things were going on in the world at that time too. It was like, I think Gulf War, and we had riots going on and stuff like that.
The LA riots.
Yeah, making people very sad in the movie theater, and then having your heroine kill herself is just kind of like, oh my god. So that's what I would have done. I would have done an escape motivation plot, and I totally would have made Ripley survive and find weapons, because I get that she's anti-gun, but I mean, if they didn't learn the fact that having guns in Aliens made that movie awesome, then they didn't learn anything, because everybody like remembers that. I mean, so many video games have like just copied that style from then on, and almost any first-person shooter I've seen since I was a kid has had some reference to Aliens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, ties back to what you were saying about, for different people, Alien or Aliens is their favorite. And I'm sure for David Fincher and probably for Sigourney Weaver that Alien is the one they like better, because clearly that's what they were trying to, emulate that more.
Fucking boomers.
I don't know. I kind of like am a purist too. I kind of like Alien better. I think it's purely just because I like horror more than I like action. And maybe that's why I'm a lot more forgiving of Alien 3 and its structure. You make a lot of good points. I do like the ending, the way that it is. It's weird, because I think no matter what you do, if you kill your main character, your protagonist, like it's very hard to pull that off, maybe even impossible, and have it be satisfying. I think they have to have some sort of like epic death speech or something in order for it to really, really work. But yeah, I mean, I remember, like, not to bring it up again, but like the end of Dark Knight Rises, watching that when like the nuke goes off and you think he's dead. I remember thinking like, this is just about as good as you can orchestrate this kind of a moment, and yet it's still going to end up feeling unsatisfying if he's actually dead. And I actually thought back to Alien 3 too, when I saw it. I was like, yeah, I'm having that same feeling of like, it's a powerful moment, but it's still just like, like, it's just like, really, that's all there is? Like, that's how it ends. Like, they just die. It's definitely not perfect, but since you brought up the situation, the LA riots and stuff, and we were kind of texting about that last night and how it's kind of mirroring what's going on now. I do like the sort of anti-establishment stance that the movie takes at the end, and it feels pretty relevant. It felt pretty relevant actually watching it with the company guys with their machine guns, like shooting at the 2 other remaining survivors. Even Aaron, the one that, is sort of like the idiot of the group and who is like, no, they're not going to kill us. Like, the company's good and they're going to come rescue us and stuff. At the very end, he's like, he realizes that that's not true and he tries to fight back and they just kill him. I think
what was up with Lance Henriksen's ear? Was he an android?
No, he's not. He's supposed to be human, although that looks very like not right. But I think the idea is that he hits him with the wrench and it like knocks his ear off. Is like it pulls it off the side of his face. Not the best look to go with if you want to like prove that he's human.
I was like, did they finally just get smart and put red liquid inside of them to make them look more human instead of white? And then I was like, okay, I guess that's not the case.
Yeah, they didn't pull that off very well.
Yeah, I was like watching it and I paused and I had to take a look and I was like, man, it looks like he's synthetic. But yeah.
I think your point though about making if you're gonna make a prison movie, it's got to be an escape movie. I think you have a very solid point, and I think that's part of the reason why the movie doesn't work. Although I still sort of stand by the idea of it's all very theme based, and the theme is it's the end of the story. It's the end of our hero's journey. It's her death. It's her coming to terms with her mistakes and her past, and accepting the fact that she can't win. Because the alien is a metaphor for death, and you can't beat it. Like, even though you can beat the alien, like, you're still gonna die eventually. Like, the metaphor that it stands for is still gonna get you. And in that regard, I think that the prisoners and the whole setup is just trying to play into that idea, which I think if you don't want to go down that road, then yeah, it's very unsatisfying and like confusing, and like, why would you structure the story this way? I don't know. That's just my opinion, but I think that's what he was going for. But again, I don't think it quite came off, and I think that's some of the reason why Dark Knight Rises doesn't quite come off. I think that the more I watch that movie, it's like that's a movie about a guy who wants to die, and like, because it's a PG-13 movie about a character that's supposed to be for kids, like, they can't really go where they need to go with that story in order to make it make sense. And I think Alien 3 has some of the same, because there's that one scene when, what's his name, Morse, the only guy who lives at the end, says something about like, we should put her head through the fucking wall, and Ripley's like, sounds good to me, because she's just like, I don't even want to like live anymore.
Well, I mean, I certainly don't want to live on this planet with you guys. I mean, that's terrible. Yeah, that's interesting. That not to harp on the Dark Knight Rises, but I think it's a different scenario altogether, only because Nolan is kind of like, he's given free reign on whatever he wants to do, and he's allowed to do whatever he wants to do and push the envelope. I think some of the choices that he makes they're polarizing sometimes. Like, he's not perfect, and he definitely has his fans and his detractors too. Whereas Fincher, I think, was kind of given a shitty situation and had to do his best to like make it happen. But without a script, I mean, I just don't know how you even start. Yeah. So it's kind of similar, but at the same time, I think that, Nolan isn't just allowed to do whatever he wants in Hollywood. It's like he's earned his credit. And
I mean, his hands are tied with The Dark Knight Rises, I think, just because it's like a comic book movie. Like, he can't be quite out in the open with like, this is a story about a suicidal Batman. Like, it's just, I don't think they would let him even be that blatant with it. I mean, it's there, but it's like kind of below the surface.
Yeah.
Anyway, I like your ideas though. I think that would be a much more engaging and exciting movie if it was more of like an escape movie, for sure.
It would thematically tie together why they're prisoners in the first place, like why you do a prison movie. Yeah.
Did you notice that that guy Holt McCallany is his name, the guy with the teardrop?
Yep.
He's in this. He's in Fight Club, and he's in Mindhunters. So my theory is that, I don't know, like, him and Fincher are buddies, or like he's just like really fun to hang out with or something like that. Because
He's
Fincher
also
doesn't
the
like.
thug at the beginning of Justice League on the rooftop with Batman.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he also had a short-lived show on FX that was excellent where he played a boxer called Lights Out.
Huh.
It didn't get picked up for a second season, but it was super good.
Yeah, I really like him. I should check that out. I don't think Fincher is like the type of director who casts. He's not like Nolan who casts like the same people over and over and over again. So
right.
it's interesting to see him cast that guy like 3 times across basically the entire span of his career.
And then each time he gets more prominent
more
roles.
screen time. Yeah.
Interesting. That's a good point. All right. Well, that was awesome. I think that's enough for today. But I picked this one. But why don't you pick the next one, and then we can do this again. It was good. Good chat.
Yeah, man.
And then
this was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Cool, man. All right. Talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Well, that should about do it for this episode of Also Starring. We are your hosts, Dan and Morgan, and join us next time for what looks to be another Charles Dance classic, Last Action Hero, also starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Thanks for joining us, and until next time.